taken in the past and building some sort of that you would then go on to test, to validate. Perhaps not relevant to everyone, but that is an important function if you are doing any sort of quantitative validation, testing, etc., etc. The fourth important function of the literature review is for you to have a foundation or to build a foundation of methodology. So what I mean by when you're reviewing all the literature in your space that is relevant to your research question, your research aims, what you're going to find naturally is you're going to get exposure to all the various studies that have been done, and you're going to see what methodologies they use. Did they use qualitative? Did they use quantitative? If they use quantitative, did they have well validated, well tested question sets? Did they publish questionnaires, etc., etc.? So the literature review gives you an opportunity to really dig into what's already been done and to build on that. Very often, if you're doing surveys, you can find through your literature review, you can find good question sets, you can find decent conduct alphas and so forth. If this language doesn't make any sense, don't stress, we'll get to it in another video. But the point is, a very important function of the literature review is for you to get some inspiration, to get some insights, and perhaps even some useful practical tools and takeaways to inform your methodology. So those are the four important whys of the literature review. And the first two are really what you need to keep in mind. In other words, showing that you understand what you're talking about, showing that you're not just coming in and trying to reinvent the wheel, show that you have read the literature that is relevant to your specific problem, and then of course show that the angle you're going to take is actually original, is somehow unique and somehow warranted in terms of going out and doing research. So let's not harp on about this anymore. Let's jump into the 3 steps of how to write your literature review. Right, so on to step 1 of how to write your literature review. Step 1 is really no surprise. Step 1 is go out and find the relevant research. Probably sounds pretty obvious, but you'll be surprised how some people approach this. So step 1 is get out there and do the digging. Get out and find the research. Now, if you've already done your proposal and that's been accepted, then chances are you've got some sort of foundation of core literature already. But nevertheless, even though your proposal has been accepted, your university and your supervisor will expect that you go on and do more review, deeper review of what's the relevant literature. So in this section, we're going to talk about 4 pretty useful tactics to go out and find the relevant literature. This part of the process can really take a lot of time if you don't have the right approach to going out and hunting. You can waste a lot of time going down dead ends, and really no one wants to do that. This is a big project and you want to get through the literature as quickly as possible. So here I'll talk about 4 techniques, 4 methods to find the literature, find the relevant research that's out there. So let's have a look at that. So method number 1 of finding the literature is what we call Google Scholar scrubbing. And really, there's nothing to this. You're probably already off Google Scholar. If you're not, you can check it out at scholar.google.com. And Google Scholar is just a search engine for academic material, much like Google is a search engine for the rest of the internet. So Google Scholar is really a powerful search engine. It's using Google's technology. And so in terms of finding material that is super relevant to whatever keywords, whatever focal topic you're looking at, you can't beat Google Scholar. Google Scholar is really great for getting that initial idea of what is the literature that's out there. What also makes Google Scholar really awesome is that they show the citation data. So in other words, how often has any particular article, journal article been cited? So this gives you a good idea of the authority and the credibility of any given article. So if there are specific requirements from your university in terms of the credibility of the content that you're citing, then you should definitely be paying very good attention to how many times each of these articles has been cited. So step 1 is get into Google Scholar, and just search for any possible relevant keyword and have a dig through all of the articles that are there. A good way to figure out what's relevant is to have a look, open the articles that seem relevant in terms of the title, and have a look at the abstract, have a quick read through that. That will give you a decent idea of whether or not this is something that suits you or that fits within your research aims and objectives. So what you'll find when you use Google Scholar is that some articles are totally free, easy to access. You click the link and open Sesame. There it is, it's accessible. And a lot of them you'll find are behind some sort of paywall. So you're going to run into that wall quite often. You might get lucky and you might find that everything you need is free and openly accessible, but you're likely going to run into a lot of dead ends in terms of hitting the journals where you have to pay, you have to log in, etc. So don't worry about that. At this point, what you want to do is you just want to take down the titles of all of these articles. If you can download anything for free, go for it, go and download it. But what you do is take down these titles, take them down exactly as you see them, including the author name, date, etc. And then head on over to method number 2, which is your university database or your university library. So every university will generally give you access to their licensed set of content. And this is usually quite broad. So most often what you'll find is that you're going to find a lot of content on Google Scholar, method number 1, and you're going to bring number 2, you're going to go and copy paste that title exactly as you found it in Google Scholar. You go and copy paste that into your university's search engine, and then most often you'll find it they're able to access it there. If you can't, you might want to shoot an email over to your institution to this article. What is really important when you use method number 2, in other words, your university's database, is that you copy paste the article title exactly as you see it. Now, the reason I say this is that unlike Google Scholar, the university databases and the university search engines are usually pretty basic, pretty rudimentary in terms of the technology they're using. So if you don't put the title in exactly as they have it in the article, there's a good chance that you're one word out and you're just going to totally miss the results that you need. It's going to look like they don't exist. So make sure that you copy paste exactly what is being shown there. So that's method number 2. Method number 1, Google Scholar, and method number 2 go hand in hand very well. So let's take a look at method number 3. Method number 3 is what we call snowballing. Snowballing is really effective once you find a few core articles that are super relevant to your topic. So what snowballing is you download, you find 2 or 3 articles that are hyper relevant to whatever your research questions are, whatever your research aims are, whatever the focus of your research is. You get those 3 articles, you go to the end of those 3 articles, and as always, as in any journal article, there will be a list of references at the end. And this is usually just completely ignored or not even printed out by students, but really this is the gold mine, because this is showing you everything that article that was super relevant to you, it's showing you everything that's built on. So in other words, all the source for you to go and unpack the foundations of that article. So what you do with those 2 or 3 core articles is you pay very referencing. You go and find those using Google Scholar or your university's database, and you read through those, you see whether they're relevant. If they are relevant, you do the same thing. You go to their reference list and you dig through the references, and you're going to find a snowball effect where you're just picking up more and more, and you're going to eventually end up with a wealth of highly relevant articles. Generally, what you'll find is as you snowball further and further, the article references might start getting older and older, because naturally articles are built on articles over time. And so it's just something to be aware of, that you might find that you start running into very old territory. So just be aware of that. Right, the final method for hunting down relevant resources, hunting down relevant articles is pretty straightforward, and that's to have a look at other people's dissertations that are related to your topic. Now, ideally, you want to be looking at dissertations from your own institution, but realistically, you're probably not going to find too many articles or too many dissertations about your own institution unless it's a really big institution. So you're probably going to have to look at other people's dissertations from other countries or from other universities, etc., etc. The good news is it doesn't really matter too much because at this point, all you're looking for is sources. You're not looking for inspiration about how they laid out their dissertation, how they connected various parts. All you're looking for is sources that are relevant to your research topic. So other people's dissertations are a great place to look because obviously they've been in a similar situation and they've gone and had to do the work that you're currently doing. So there are various databases that you can look at in addition to your own school's database, EBSCO, ProQuest, etc. There's quite a few of them. What I'll do is include some links to the main ones below this video. So you can just check below this video and you can jump through to those. Dissertations generally are easy to access, free to access. Obviously, people are not charging money for them. So that is a great way to quickly look at other people's literature reviews that were in a similar space. A big word of warning through all of this is you are dealing with students' work. So you don't know that that student got a good mark, you don't know that they got a bad mark, all you know is that they passed. So do be careful when you're using this method, do use common sense and don't rely too heavily on anyone's dissertation, but nevertheless use it as a starting point for finding relevant articles. So those are the three methods of finding the literature. That is step one. It is the most important. You can't do anything until you have gone and done the digging. So many students avoid the digging. It's hard work, it's painful, it's slow. But as I say, the smart way to approach this is use a combination of the methods that I've spoken about and don't go and read full articles, just read the abstract. If the abstract doesn't tell you enough, look at the introduction and the conclusion of any given article, and that should give you a feel for, is it relevant, isn't it relevant? So that's pretty much step one in a nutshell, find the literature. So let's jump on to step two. Step two of how to write your literature review is that you now need to log, catalog, and synthesize the literature. So three important functions, and they're essential as a next step. Now, I'm presenting these as step one and then step two. It's not necessarily sequential. What you often do is you will find the whole lot of literature in step one, you'll start logging it, cataloging, synthesizing it, and then some new thoughts will come up. And you potentially go back to step one, start looking for more literature. And so it might be a more iterative approach. In fact, it should be a more iterative approach, but I'm trying to simplify the process here and saying that step two is logging and cataloging. So let's dig into step two. What do we mean by logging, cataloging, and synthesizing the literature? So step one is logging the reference information. Logging is really a simple activity, and all it means is you've gone and dug up a whole lot of articles, some of which are relevant, some of which aren't, and you can throw them out. But you've gone and gathered all of these articles. And the most important thing to do right up front now is to go and put that into your reference management software. Now, if you're not using a reference manager like Mendeley or Zotero or something like that, now is the time to learn how to use one, because you're just never going to manage your references any other way for a good dissertation or thesis. So we do have videos on both of those pieces of software. I'll include the links below this video. So step one is go and log all your information. What you'll find with a lot of pieces of software, specifically Mendeley, which you can check out that video on this channel, is there is a good deal of synchronizing and easy importing from the likes of Google Scholar or the likes of your university database. You can pretty easily import those references directly into Mendeley. So you don't need to go and type everything out. If you are doing importing, I would recommend you just run over it and check all the data that's been imported, make sure that it makes sense. Sometimes there can be small errors, sometimes there can be typos in the reference data, but overall the import tends to work pretty well. So step one, get all that data into your reference manager. Even if stuff doesn't particularly relevant right now, put it in because it's just going to save you time later. You don't need to go back and forth. So as you find content, dump it into your reference manager, and then it's there. When it comes time to actually cite it, it's as simple as just entering in the title and clicking drag and drop, and boom, it's in your Word document. So step one, log all your data or log all your references or your journal articles into your reference manager. Step two is your information. So this is, again, really, really important, arguably even more important than step one. You're going to, through this process, you're going to build up a huge wealth of literature. And it's tempting in the beginning to think that you are going to remember what everything was called. You're going to remember that point that that guy made over there, that framework that someone did that was super relevant or maybe not so relevant. It's tempting to think that you're going to remember all this stuff. And in reality, you're not. You're just simply not. As you build out more and more and more and more, it's just going to become a haze of information. And yeah, you'll start remembering certain authors' names and surnames and whatnot, but in reality, there's no way you can navigate this. If you're doing a good literature review, you're probably working with 100, 200, who knows how many different references or sources, and you're just not going to remember them. So what becomes really important is to build a catalog. Now, I recommend building a catalog in Excel. We've got a free template that you can download from the Grad Coach website. I'll include that in the or below this video. And whether you use that or not, you need some sort of database of all of your articles. And what that database needs to be, it's not particularly sophisticated, but it needs to be something that includes, for every article, needs to include the authors, the dates, the title, obviously, that core information, some sort of summary about what the article is about, some sort of summary about the key points, the key insights in relation to your topic, and perhaps some summary of methodological components or suggestions or assets that you could use, and just any other notes about each article. And what you ideally want is for that to be split up over as many columns, in other words, to have as granular data as possible, so that you can go and you can sort and you can filter, so that you can sort, for example, by a certain time. Your review might be in time order. We'll talk about that next. You want to be able to sort by key topics. So I usually recommend putting some keywords in for each article. You want to be able to sort by key variables. For example, if you're doing a quantitative study and you're testing the relevance of certain variables, you want to be able to quickly in Excel just filter out and see, okay, who was it that spoke about this variable having an impact on X or Y. So you want to get down to as much detail as possible there, so that when you come to a point where you have 100, 200, 300 different sources, you can just quickly run through that. And that becomes super, super important when you're finally writing up your literature review, because you don't want to have to go and say, okay, people that spoke about this. You just want to go into Excel and say, okay, this variable over here, just say we're talking about a specific variable that contributes towards trust, hypothetically. Let's say competence is that variable. Who were all of the articles with all of the authors that spoke about trust, that spoke about competence being an antecedent of trust, for example. And then Excel will just go, boom, these were the five authors. And then you can very quickly put together a really chunky piece in your literature review saying, these people spoke about it. And they had a slightly different angle. Yeah. So this is super, super important. And it's something that students tend to rush past because it feels like you're just doing double work, having to build a catalog and put all that detail in there and still having to go and write about it. But trust me, literature reviews take time, and you're not going to remember who said what. So very importantly, use the catalog. And as I say, if you don't want to build your own one, there's a free one you can download from the graphic. Whatever you do, build a catalog. Right. let's get on to step 3. So naturally, step to synthesize it in your mind. So far, you've gone and logged all your data into your reference manager. You've gone and cataloged the stuff into Excel. But it's tempting to think, okay, well, we've got it all. It's all there. Now let's just write it. But you've got to take a step back and you've got to really spend your time synthesizing all of this information and thinking about how does it all fit together. So this is an important step, and it's not one that I can give you too much prescription on. It's not one that I can give you too much advice about, but you've got to spend time in your literature. You've got to spend time thinking about how the research questions that you're asking are being answered by the current theory, by the current literature, the current research. How do all of these pieces fit together? Who's agreeing about what? What are people disagreeing about? How do everything, or how does everything fit together? And what narrative am I going to write about this? It's really important to give some thought to how it all comes together that you want to develop in your literature. Spend some time taking a step back because up until now, everything you've done has been very, very focused on this article and then this article and then this article. And what happens while you're doing that is that you start thinking, naturally, you start thinking in silos. So you want to take a step back from all of that and you want to say, okay, how does it all fit together now? If I were to give a speech on all that has been seen, how could I combine that into something that's cohesive? And how can I combine that into a narrative? Because that's what you're going to be doing in your literature review chapter. So take a step back, think about what is going on here. And this is not something that you'll do in one session. You're probably going to do it over a good few days, perhaps a few weeks. What I'd recommend is to use some sort of visual aid. Now, everyone's different, but I find that visual aids are super useful here. So what I mean by that is spend some time mind mapping all of these bits and pieces that you've got. You can use mind mapping software like FreeMind or that are available, or my preference is a nice big whiteboard and a marker and just freehanding it and basically connecting this idea to that idea to this idea to that idea and raising new questions and just putting it all down in a visual format, trying to bring all of this stuff together visually for me works well because I can just keep track of everything that's being said as opposed to trying to keep it in my mind. So whatever works for you, perhaps it's just sitting down and making notes, perhaps it's drawing up mind maps. Whatever you do, don't rush into now writing up, because what you're going to do is you're going to rush in and you're going to write a decent literature review because all the content's fresh in your mind, but you're going to fail to see how the things fit together. And that means synthesizing all of this content. And if you fail to see that, you're really not going to have a strong piece of literature or a strong literature review, because outsiders will be able to step in, take a zoomed out perspective and go, but what about this? Why didn't he talk about this? And the reason you is take a step back and think about how it all fits together. So I know I'm harping on about this, but take the time to step back and digest and synthesize all of the information that's in front of you. So that is step 2 of your process. Log it, catalog it, and then step back and synthesize all of this in your mind into some sort of big picture view. Right, step 2 done. Let's move on to step 3. Right, finally on to step 3, outlining and writing up. Finally, we're going to get writing, right? So it's really important to notice that I said 2 things there. 1, outlining, and 2, writing up. don't write up before you outline. I know it's really tempting at this stage. You've gone through all of these steps before, you've gone through all of the process, and you're just saying, I just want to get writing, I just want to get my thoughts down onto paper, I just want to get something, some sort of tangible product that I can give to my supervisor, give to my committee. I understand, but trust me, first step is outlining. Outlining can mean going back to a whiteboard and again doing things visually, or it can just be a Word document with a set of bullet points. Whatever your preference is, most important thing is to figure out how you're going to structure your discussion upfront. If you don't spend that time, what you're going to do is you're going to get writing and you're going to say a lot, but it's not necessarily going to be conveying things in an optimized fashion. It's not going to be necessarily conveying things in a way that is easy for a first-time reader to understand. And it is really important that you take the time to communicate well, because you've done all this work, and it's very easy for a student who knows their literature inside out to do a poor job of communicating that on paper. And that's obviously very sad, because they've done the work, they've put in the effort, but they just didn't communicate it well on paper. So let me not hop on. The point is, spend some time outlining how you're going to approach your dissertation, or how you're going to approach your literature review first. There are, broadly speaking, there's two ways that you can structure a literature review. One is chronologically, so just structuring it based on how the narrative has developed over time, and that's suitable for some topics, for some research questions, etc. And another way to structure it is thematically. So very often, if you are looking at antecedents, drivers, causes of X, or contributors to X, a nice way to structure it is per antecedent, or per group of drivers, so that there's driver number one, driver number two, driver number three, driver number four, and how all of these things contribute to a certain outcome. So how are you going to structure your literature review is really down to each person. I can't really recommend how you do that in this sort of video. If you're unsure, you book a free consultation with one of our grad coach guides, and we give you some good advice in that respect. Regardless of what your structure is going to be, make sure that you're outlining everything first. Have a clear outline on paper. Obviously, you're not going to stick to this 100%. You might take a turn once you start writing. That's absolutely fine, but have something that you start with. Have a clear idea of how you're going to develop a narrative before. Don't fall into the trap of just running off and writing up 5,000 words, 10,000 words, with lots of information, but not a clear narrative, because the narrative is what wins. Having a clear line of argument that builds A plus B plus C plus D equals whatever outcome. That is the most important thing in terms of communicating what you have. So step one, outline. Then step two is time to write it up. Right, so in terms of writing up, I can't give you really too much advice on this, but I can say that there is a very important thing to keep in mind when you're writing up. And that is that on your first write-up, perfection is not the objective. I'm going to say that again, because this is so important to just getting things down on paper. Don't try go for perfect. Perfect is the wrong objective at this stage. Really, a really good mantra to work with is done is better than perfect. And what you're trying to do in your first draft of your literature review, and really your first draft of anything in your dissertation or thesis, is to just get the rough content down. You've already got an outline, so whatever you put down is going to be a reasonably decent narrative, but don't get stuck on conveying points in the best possible fashion. Don't get stuck in trying to create this perfectly smooth argument, the smooth narrative on first draft. Rather, just get everything down onto paper for version one. Then what you do once you've done that is you go back. I would suggest once you've dumped everything onto paper, I would suggest take a day or two, step away from it. just clear your mind, get away from this literature, because your mind will be foggy by this point. Then come back and have a read through and do a bit of a rough edit on how you can just improve the flow from one section to another, how you can strengthen certain points, how you can improve the prominence of some certain component that everything hinges on. Tighten it up, basically. Then what I would suggest you do is give your literature review to a friend or a family member or someone who cares enough to actually read it, and ask them to have a read through. Don't give them much information. Ask them to have a read through and to just give you some feedback. Did they understand it? Did they find it interesting to read? Did it make any sense, really? And a good way of judging whether or not you got your key points across is to ask them to explain the literature review back to you, and obviously not in great detail, but to ask them to say, just give you a bit of a summary of what was it all about. And what you'll see when you get that feedback from someone who's completely fresh, someone that hasn't been in the thick of all this literature, in the thick of your research topic, in the thick of a dissertation or thesis, what you'll get is a very clear indication of what points stuck, what points were clear, and what points were not clear. So that's super, super useful feedback. And this is why I say, if you're going to get a friend to look at your content, don't give them all of the information up front. Don't give them a warm-up. Just give them, here's my document. If there's some technical jargon that you need to explain, maybe you want to explain your research questions, that would be a good start, so at least they understand what you're trying to achieve. But don't give them the mini version. Give them your literature review, ask them to have a read of it. Whatever they tell you in response, whatever they give back to you when you ask them to explain it, that's going to give you a very, very good view of what points were strong, which points were clear, which arguments really need some propping up. So I would do that, then obviously do an edit after that. Maybe have a few friends that could give you feedback. Of course, the more the merrier. Once you've got that feedback, once you see what's lacking, do another tightening up of your document at that point. And then it's probably a good idea to send it off to your supervisor and get some feedback from them. You can also, of course, work with one of our research specialists at Grad Coach, and they can give you an in-depth critique before you send it off to your supervisor. That's up to every student. What is beneficial if you work with a professional beforehand is that they will iron out all the pretty straightforward issues, all the basic issues. And what that does is it clears up your supervisor's plate so that they can really focus on key issues as opposed to fairly rudimentary things. So it's up to you how you want to work that, but whatever you do, get that pretty tightened up document over to your supervisor and get the feedback from them before you go and tighten it up any further. That is pretty important. And depending on your university, you might have multiple review sessions with your supervisor. You might only have one. You've got to figure out how best to utilize that resource of supervision and feedback. But do pay a lot of attention to whatever feedback they give you, because very often the supervisor is the first marker. And so you want to be satisfying whatever requests they're putting in. So that is step 3. As I say, really important to outline, then get writing. But when you're writing, remember that done is better than perfect. Don't get stuck in trying to make things 100% the first time around. Just get your thoughts down onto paper and then tighten up, give to a friend, give to someone at Grad Coach, give to your research supervisor, and tighten up through the process. But don't try to write the perfect thing the first time, because you're just going to get stuck. You're just going to get writer's block, and you're never going to finish this thing. So there you have it. Those are the 3 steps of how to write a literature review.
Yes, that marks the end of our video this morning, and I sincerely hope that you have picked a thing or two from this video. As I said earlier, for some of us who have joined probably in the middle, we said that what we are interested in today, especially in our congruency student session, is to try to pick out some few techniques that can help us when we are trying to write that section of the literature review. And this is really general, whether you're writing using the approach of the systematic review or you're using any other approach. But it's very important that we have some of these techniques, we have proper understanding of why we are doing this review, and we also have proper understanding of some of the techniques that can guide us as we write this. But again, I want to say that this is not really absolute. You will notice that as you work along with your supervisors, they will give you a direction of a course of that you should follow. And so this is really not absolute, but you can pick a thing or two that can help you in your journey, especially in that section of literature review. As I said earlier this morning, we are really very interested in two things. One, just want to hear from you if at all this video was really very useful to you, and if you've been able to learn a thing or two, you to share with us. Then number two, as I said earlier, that all of us here, it's most likely that we are at different levels of our PhD. So the challenge that I'm going through right now could probably be different from what some other person is going through. So it's a little bit quite difficult to get a piece of material that is, applicable to everybody else. But as I said earlier, that in case we have a piece of information which is where you have already bypassed your comments, and it will be very good for the rest of us who may be at that stage. But for some of us who have not reached there, it will be very important for us to take notes and listen from those who have gone past that stage, so that we are able to improve on our work. So therefore, this morning, I would like to open this up and hear from you, especially students. Want to hear from you if this has been something of good use to you. What is your comment? What's your take? Then number two, would you be able to share with us what you are doing, where are you, and how can the managers of this platform support you in trying to help you come out from where you're stuck from? That's really the purpose that we are pursuing this morning. So I open this up, really. You're there, you have something you've learned this morning and you want to share with us, that would be very good. And I'm seeing a hand from Ronald, I guess. Yes, Ronald, unmute and go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair and everyone, and doctors, with all respect and protocol observed. The first thing I can say I've appreciated with it, his table or his presentation basically is how to arrange the work. Then that matrix of how do you synthesize or how you organize your work is critical, because in the past, I've tried to do it on a personal level, but I didn't know what columns to begin with, where do we put. But now that he has given the key point, you need to come out with the research questions, or what are your objectives you're trying to understand. Then there, someone can begin to organize the table in a systematic way. In the past, I was using Microsoft Word, and when I researched around the literature matrix, I saw some people using Excel. So from that point on, I shifted to the Excel template, which is something good. And I can understand the rationale for that due to the filter function, because you need to be able to filter the work out. In the past, I'd seen other members presenting their work, but I was always stuck. How does someone filter out and present the gaps? The other critical thing, which I've really appreciated, is this concept on how to synthesize. My question is, Do we write the protocol first or outline the requirements first of the questions? Then we go ahead to develop that table, knowing that whichever column is created is answering the questions that have been set. Secondly, according to what you have asked in your question, where are we at this stage? I'm so far beginning my academic journey, and we are starting with the process of trying to draft our proposal at the moment, as at my level here of PhD. The question I'm interested in, we have been requested to prepare a systematic review, and I've seen so many times it has been emphasized here in the group, and you really see some colleagues who don't do it, you find they're not able to illustrate the gaps well. My question today to the panel and to everyone, how do I begin with the systematic review? I am passionate, I'm ready to put in the work and the time. Where do I put step one? You read so many things on the internet. Others say begin with the matrix, others say write the protocol. And if I'm to write the protocol, where can I get at least a standard template to guide me on how I start drafting my protocol? I submit, Chair. Thank you once more. The video has really been informative. It has really opened my eyes. I put that back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ronald. I think you are just spot on. A number of people are asked to go and do systematic review. And I want to say that we are blessed that we have Professor Antai, and I think he can really give a very good piece of information on that. And again, I believe there are some students in this platform that we could reach, and they can be able to help. We can help one another. I believe there are some students here, and I think along the way, we'll be able to call some of them to help us, especially in this systematic review. But you spot on. Thank you very much, Ronald. Again, I want to, they say, my brother Bob is saying, I would like to know how Mendeley works. Yes, I can tell you that we have, again, a number of students here who know how to use Mendeley, and I want to really say that Mendeley is a very good, powerful software that can help you if you become an expert. You can really work with the Mendeley. You can have all your information, all your articles, and I can assure you, you can set it in such a way that by the time you finish writing your article, all your references are there, both inside and at the reference list. Again, I can, like, I think this one, I don't fear to mention that we have people in this group. We have somebody called Charles Olupot. We have another person here, I think James, and many other people who have worked with Mendeley, and they can be of help. And maybe to a little extent, myself, to a little extent, but I think those are the names I mentioned earlier, can be very useful to you in as far as the use of Mendeley is concerned. And somebody song about textbooks on systematic review. Again, I would do. Can I kindly ask Professor Joseph Ntai humbly to just throw a word or two on systematic review? Kindly, Professor.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Joseph. I see that the questions that are being raised, or the comments, are really very pertinent at the moment, but what I see is that what the students are requesting for is really a discussion, a presentation on some of those things. The time that we have now cannot really enable us to go through systematic literature review. As you are aware, Joseph, this is something that took us some time. And sometimes there's a confusion about the general literature review that is done and the systematic literature review. And we have different other types, like the state-of-the-art literature review and systematic and so forth. So I think, Joseph, if you agree with the students, we, especially those who are interested in it, we could just schedule time off and then have a discussion of that, including those software packages, whether you're going to use Mendeley, whether you're going to use Excel, whatever it is. You remember we had to have a discussion on this as well, and it took us some time. And those are not the only ones that are available. There are many others. So the choice depends on what is available, what you can afford, especially for some of those that can be bought. There are those that are readily available, given the constraints that we are in. You may decide to use this or the other. I mean, that's the only thing I can say at the moment. Otherwise, going into the technical bit, because it is a process and a systematic process, which also has a methodology, right? So I don't think we can discuss it now, but I think what they're raising is quite important because people get confused. And the research questions that are asked are totally different from the ones you have with the general review of literature. Joseph, that's all that I can say at the moment.
Thank you very much, Prof. And indeed, that's what it is. The systematic literature review is you know, is something unique. It has its own unique approach, and as Professor suggested, we will find time and we arrange, and especially for those who be interested, we have a platform where we do a systematic literature review. And if members will be really interested, we can really schedule a day 1 or 2, and then we will have the procedure for systematic review done under the guidance of Professor Joseph Mutai. But also, I would also request that some of the students, especially those who are doing energy economics, they have gone through systematic review, and I want to ask that if you're having challenges there, even before we schedule, you can reach some of them, and they can be of help to you. There's a question here. Are there any possible recommendations for reading from you? Okay. This one really, as Professor said, we will let's just square off some time and we discuss a systematic review. It's becoming a very important, part of the journey that we must undertake. So please, we will organize.
Yeah, right. Maybe just to answer him, the books exist certainly. And I think when we organize, we can always give them the books that they're interested in. And most of these models for systematic literature review were actually developed in the area of medicine and for purposes of really enabling policy making. So the systematic review literature is a little bit new in the area of management. But there are also writings in entrepreneurship and other areas. I think this is information that we can always pass on once we have a meeting for systematic literature review. Thanks, Joseph.
Welcome, Prof. And my senior brother, Bernard, please unmute and make your comment.
Yes, Joseph, really nothing much apart from appreciating what I saw in the video, but also raise 1 or 2 questions to add on our to-do list. For me, from the video, I think the 4 areas the video showed us where to pick articles from was my take home this morning. Sometimes you go on the internet and you put in whatever you key in, and you cannot distinguish between what I could call the good ones and maybe the not good ones, or the junk. You can't even isolate which one is authentic, which one is real, which one is on the other side. I think that's what for me I picked up. But maybe learning from the comments, Joseph, as a group, maybe as students, there are two things which we also needed to add on our to-do list. One is out of sharing experiences. When you download this journal article or whatever it is, to be honest, what do you do with it? Where do you start with this particular article? People will mention, may I do it like this? May I start with this? May I first scan through? And I think that is where we should also put our attention on without being presumptive. And then too, sometimes we are coming from different backgrounds. You're coming from maybe an economics, and then you find this journal article because out of where you have picked it, and it is totally engineering or very mathematical or very scientific, comparing to what the side you're coming from, which almost sends you 4 or 5 steps back to first even learn the words and the methods or the formula or the mathematics that the article has. So in such a scenario again, and you don't have time to, to study or get classes on most of what these things are, what do you again shoot for when you get some kind of articles because you are reading cross-cutting issues for our work? Just suggestions, Joseph. But I think we'll see how we put that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. So these are very, very, very critical issues to deal with. And as Professor suggested, we are going to agree on a day when it's available. We also inquire from Dr. Ahmed to give us the opportunity to have this. We will find a day where we can look at this systematic literature review. Incidentally, one of the things that happens in the systematic literature review is that you have the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So some of these worries, whether you have scientific, mathematical, and so on, some of those things should be addressed in that section when you bring the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the literature that you have at hand. So a number of those things we will really address them, and I think that will do us good. Our time is fast spent. I want to thank you very much for logging in, and the views that you've shared, we have taken note of them. Key among them is really systematic literature review. And as professors has said, we will find a day or two where we can specifically deal with systematic literature review. I want really to bring the student session to an end. I want to thank you so much for logging in and paying attention and giving your valuable comments. And again, I want to say that keep sending your comments and your concerns. You can send them to Bernard. You can send them to Shafiq, myself, Dr. Gembe, so that in the end we are able to look for information that can be of help to address the issues and the concerns that we have. I want to thank you very much and hand over this to, I don't know whether, yes, Dr. Michael Koche is on. Dr. Michael, please allow me hand over this mic to you to drive us through the next session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Joseph, for steering us through this moment.
It has been a wonderful moment that you shared with us a video, and incidentally, we have learned a lot of things from the video. I want to take this opportunity also to thank everyone for logging in this morning. It's not easy to be able to log in every morning. I know for some of you have been logging in every day, every week, every Sunday. We take it for granted, but I must honestly thank you. All the students, thank you so much for logging in, and everyone. This morning, I want to take this opportunity to appreciate the senior colleagues who have always supported us in this forum. Of course, I want to begin by appreciating Professor Joseph Mtai for making sure that this platform is on, making sure that it continues giving us value. Professor, we honestly appreciate you as our mentor. I also want to appreciate Professor Sam Adaramola from Norway. Professor, we appreciate you. I also want to appreciate Professor James Gagari. Thank you, Professor. Dr. Gideon Nkuruzinza, Dr. Ibrahim Senze, and Dr. Ahmad Walgembe. I must thank you so much for sparing your time and sharing your knowledge and being part of this endeavor. I also want to appreciate all the students who presented their proposals, their work, and making sure that we learn from each other. This morning, we are having one of the presentations from one of the students who is at proposal level. And I think, as usual, we shall be able to give him 40 minutes. Of course, as more senior colleagues log in, I'll be able to acknowledge them. And then we shall have more session when we shall be able to share. But this morning, our presenter will be Otim. So I would ask him to share his screen and then begin making his presentation. It will take 40 minutes, and then I believe that you'll have feedback from your fellow colleagues and the senior colleagues. Yes, I don't know whether they are on or team. Is it Jacob? Jacob?
Yes, a moment. Yeah, I am on. Let me share the slide.
Okay. Welcome. I'll just use 40 minutes, then so that we have time to give you feedback and interact with you. Thank you.
I'm not seeing again my thing where.
You just go to share the screen, green.
Let's see. The problem I'm having, I'm not seeing in the desktop. Let me see the background.
You're not seeing what?
I'm not seeing my desktop icon. It's bringing me things different. So sorry. It's very easy to do this.
But you have reached the share screen.
Yes.
So what's the problem? When you share the screen, you first open the document, then you can begin. Have you opened the?
Okay, let me first open the document, I think. That's why I'm not seeing it.
Are you getting anywhere there?
document. It's not coming. Don't see the document. If not, I will.
Jacob, first stop sharing and go and open the file. Then
I've already opened.
Okay.
If you are stuck, you can send to my email. I'll share it.
I think what you can do is to save the document on the desktop. Don't use a shortcut. Just save the actual document on desktop, open it from desktop, and then share.
And maybe as he's working on that, that's I do not request that before you do presentation, you try to practice with a colleague, open Zoom link.
No, I've been doing it, but the only problem I'm having, I don't know why it's not showing, but let me send it to Bernard, my colleague, and they can be able to share from that. I don't understand technically why I can't see this on the icon. It is also.
Just share mine.
So why is it not coming?
So Bernard, like, he could share with me.
Okay, wait, can you provide me with the email?
The email is on the chat room.
In the chat.
Jacob, check the chat room. There is email for Doctor there, so that you can just go to messages there.
Chair, maybe as Mr. Tim tries to share, there are some other students who had actually requested to present, like Wasike David, and I see him in this meeting. I don't know whether he contacted you and what arrangements are in place for him to, is it next week, or probably he's also ready for today. Chair,
Okay. Dr. Hamad, maybe you make a comment on that.
Yes, thank you very much. We had prioritized our team because he has been waiting for the last 2 weeks. So we had thought that we should give him priority, unless if Wasika is ready and our team is saying he's not ready today, then we can switch. But our team has been waiting for the last 2 weeks, Prof.
Yeah. Okay.
We had said,
but
yes.
Don't forget him. Just put him on the program.
Yes, Prof.
I know there are also a number of other students that have ever presented here at some stage, but I think we have lost contact with them, and we don't know whether they are progressing or not progressing. So maybe at one stage they also have to tell us how far they have gone. I can
Jacob, are you experiencing challenges? Because I'm not seeing the email.
Maybe I'm experiencing some challenges, but I don't know why.
So you can
send an email?
Because I'm not seeing maybe we could, I don't know. I suggest that if that other students ready, we could, because I see it like Jacob, sometimes if the document is messed up, you might.
But Chair, I also want to suggest that at any given time, possibly 2 students are scheduled, so that if one gets technical challenges, then another one maybe presents.
Yeah, Prof. Yeah, Prof. We take it very seriously. I think it's a very good
Otherwise,
learning.
now if he fails, you may have to postpone because you will not have any other person to present.
It's taking so long. I don't know why this technical problem is coming now.
Even sending. Do you have network?
It is going to.
Mr. Chairman.
Prof, we have been requesting students normally to share with us their PowerPoints before Sunday. And this is just a reminder to all those who are preparing to present that given that you may have your personal challenges in terms of connectivity, it's better to share your presentation before or a day before presentation. For guidance, and then to such issues, avoid such issues.
I think that's very, very important.
I don't know why this thing is just like this. Because I've been doing a lot of slide presentation on this line.
Okay, what we could do, as you are trying to sort out yourself, I would suggest that we continue discussing some of the critical issues which members have raised about systematic reviews and Mendley. I think there are some issues. I saw Prof.
I don't know whether Farida is ready. She had. I didn't emphasize with her, but she was ready. I don't know whether she's online. Let me cross-check with her as we proceed, Dr. Michael.
Yeah, but that's what happens with technology. Sometimes can disappoint you when you least expect.
Let me restart and then I try again. Let me just first switch.
No, but you share you share so maybe David says that he's not ready, but I would think that as Jacob is trying to sort himself out, and sometimes, like you said, technology can be challenging. There is Oguta, yes.
Let him first unshare. I think he's still sharing. Let him unshare.
Yeah, he's saying actually wants to restart his laptop. And that could be also. But we have somebody who wants to present. That's Oguta. I don't know. We'll give him. I don't know what could be the consensus. There is somebody who is ready to present. Can we give him a go ahead? Oguta.
Here, I think that will be okay.
Yeah, please. Okay. As Jacob is organizing himself, let us have Oguta make a presentation. But I think is a learning point to all of us. So we shall make necessary actions to make sure that people send in their presentations early. Really, and even makes it easier for people to make comments. You know, sometimes we comment on what we don't clearly understand. But Oguta, please, you share your screen and then you do the presentation. Oguta, are you on?
I am on.
Yeah, Jacob has started sharing. So I think he has succeeded. Okay, thank you everyone for the patience. I know technology, like I said, sometimes can give you a challenge. So Jacob, please, you can go ahead and share with us. And I must thank everyone for the patience. Yes, Jacob, you can go ahead.
I thought it is my screen which is on.
Yeah, you are now on. You can
this
see
macroeconomic
variables.
This
is Oguta.
Jacob team. We are seeing Jacob team. I think he has succeeded. I think The screen I'm seeing is for Jacob team.
Jacob team now is. So Jacob, Oguta, sorry, but I know technology sometimes gives us hardship, but let us bear with Jacob. And Jacob, please compose yourself and go ahead to make your presentation. You'll be next, Jacob, please.
Now the audio has disappeared.
Yes. Good morning, members. Thank you very much for the patience, and I am sorry for the technical glitch. I thought I'd prepared everything very well, but I didn't do some testing, but there were some few issues. And aside, this is my presentation, and this is the proposal which I am working on with my doctoral committee. It is on macroeconomic variables, governance, carbon emission nexus in commercial countries. I'm a PhD student in energy economics and governance. This thing is not also, oh my God. I'm seeing the slides are not moving. Members, I'm very sorry.
Can you click or use arrows?
There are no arrows. Maybe I take it back again to just normal slide.
On the keyboard.
The keyboard is also not working.
Arrows on your keyboard. Those 4 arrows on the left side, right side, bottom of your keyboard. Use them. One is
yeah, well, let me present it on a normal slide without putting it on.
Okay.
Without using the slideshow.
Up there is a button for escape and to take you back to normal.
Okay, yeah, it has started moving, I think now.
Okay.
Yeah, yes. What is the problem? The presentations, one is on background, problem, research problem, research objective. These are the layout. Since I'm late, I don't want to spend a lot of time there. The idea of my study basically stems from the issue of carbon emission, basically changing the global temperature, which we are talking about climate change and today. So the idea of climate change from climate scientists basically originates on a target which was set during pre-industrial period, which came between 1750 to 1850. During this period, there was no technology, as you can see from this particular picture. During this period, there was animal traction. This idea of technology was very, 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 very low. There was still rudimentary system, and then the level of global temperature was very low. I'm getting feedback. The environmental pollution is an existent threat to humanity due to global warming problem. When we look at basically what is happening currently, the glaciers in the high mountain of Asia are melting down. But when we trace from around 1850 up to date, you see that particular graph, it is showing you that up to around 1925, the temperature rise was relatively low at a global level. But from 1925 up to now, the projection is showing the increase in the global temperature. And this has a very serious bearing, as you can see from this particular graph.
It's like we lost him again on voice.
Yeah, from this particular point, we see the increase in the temperature from this particular point, that the red point we are seeing here, there is a temperature rise, and it's showing you that the temperature is increasing over a period of time. And this projection is showing that there is a very big problem if nothing is done. The rise in global temperature have far-reaching repercussions on the environment. And this is coming in terms of global sea level accelerated since 2003. Our oceans are warming, and there is ocean acidification, meaning that our oceans are having acidic element, and that is a very big threat to our aquatic life. There is a problem of food security and population displacement, harming of crucial ecosystems, undermining progress towards sustainable development. As we are aware that sustainable development, number one, talks about no poverty, but with the global warming, farmers, especially in developing countries, are likely to have a very huge problem, and their poverty level is likely to increase. When we come to the area, sustainable goal number 2, zero hunger, with this particular problem of increasing the global temperature, we are likely to have much more problem. So there is a problem of food security and population displacement. This is coming through maybe tornadoes that take place, harming of the crucial ecosystem, undermining the progress towards sustainable development. But key indicators have shown us that there are ever increasing rise in the temperature. As we can see, 50 degrees Celsius, which was recorded in the village of British Columbia. This is a very high temperature. And in southern USA, it was recorded 54.4 degrees Celsius. This is very, very high, higher than the boiling point. And coming to the context of Africa, Africa has been identified as one of the parts of the world which are more vulnerable to the climate change. And with the extreme weather situation, we are likely to experience more hunger, displacement of population, and reduction in our GDP, because by and large, majority of people in Africa depend on agriculture, and this agriculture is even rain-fed water. We use rain-fed water. And because of this, we are likely to experience more problem, and we will be able to have more reduction in our GDP. African countries are projected to experience detrimental consequences change if nothing is done. The occurrence will lead to a reduction in government expenditure, because if people are not producing enough, then we would be able to find the government not able to raise enough money to finance some of its expenditure, and this may result into government debt and a reduction further in GDP per capita. We have provided here some few countries for scenarios analysis, and in Africa, we're seeing if the temperature continues to warm, we are experiencing, for example, Morocco had a low warming, we will be able to have a -4 degree reduction in GDP. But coming to Mauritania, we see it is low at this particular point. We have within East Africa, Tanzania, but under high warming scenario, by 2050, Tanzania will be able to have a reduction of its GDP by 18.6%. And this is very critical, meaning that the Tanzania, which has already achieved a middle income status, is likely to go back to its original status, because the reduction in GDP will cause a huge problem. So this is just a simple diagram to picture to show what is taking place in some areas in South Africa. We are seeing drought affecting the situation so much. And because of that, there is a very huge problem. And the increase in global temperature is always associated to the increase in greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And the major causes are basically CO2 emission, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorocarbons. But CO2 is the major contributor with up to 80% of global warming. But however, methane has a dangerous effect. We get methane from the combustion of fossil fuels, but plus other, plus the animals, the grazing systems, the animals also produce methane. To save the planet, a number of actions have been put in place from the scientific point of view. The scientists have not left things without taking care. United Nations Environmental Program was formed in 1980, which established interpanel of climate change. And they started doing their work. In 1992, the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, which is in Brazil, 166 nations signed United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change to reduce these emissions. And that also later on culminated into the famous 1997 Kyoto Protocol with the targets to create emission trading schemes and ensuring there is clean development mechanism even in households. In 2015, this is very common and many people understand Paris Climate Accord under COP21. And then last year, COP26 also set targets to ensure that we are able to control our emission levels. This has been some of the things that have been put in place. In terms of the energy and environmental studies, we find that the literature shows that people have used IPAT theory, which was developed by basically Endlich and Audrey in 1972. And this was modified for better econometric estimation under what they call STIPAT. This particular model assumes that the emission is caused by the influence of population, affluence, which is basically our GDP, and then the technology. This particular theory was also built on what we call environmental coordinate theory or hypothesis. But in our analysis, we will be able to see in how I try to formulate the theoretical framework to help this in particular analysis. So this is our Kuznets hypothesis is stated is that at a very low level of per capita income, the environment deteriorates at that particular point. A turning point is reached with the increase in per capita income, and later on we will see a fall in the environmental, meaning that there will be environmental improvement as we move along with our work. In terms of the research problem, with the increase in the global emission and then the rise in the temperature from COP21, emission targets were set and a number of efforts have been put in place, but we see that emission levels are still increasing, and that causes a little bit of worry. But in terms of the studies that have been done, we see that our results are still inconclusive on what drives CO2 emission. For example, there are studies which show that GDP greater causes CO2 emission that later on will lead to climate change. There are those who believe in bidirectional relationship or reverse causality, and then there are studies that there is no causality between GDP growth and CO2 emission. In terms of the energy, which is the primary target, needed to reduce the energy consumption, and if there is any energy consumption, should not be in position to cause more emission level. So with this particular thing, we see energy consumption, which is EC in my abbreviation in the slide here. EC is considered to cause carbon emission, and which of course is linked to the change in the temperature. But there are studies which show there is bidirectional causality But we also have studies which show that there is no relationship between consuming energy and then the emission. So the major key stake here is that these studies is inconclusive, but we also see that most of the studies that have been conducted, they ignore the role of governance. So this particular study seeks also to introduce the role of governance and also decompose the GDP into sectors. These sectors of the economy are services, we have agricultural sector, and we have industrial sector. But also we find that most of the studies that we have been undertaken ignores the structural breaks in the modeling. So we, in this particular proposal, we seek to ensure that we solve those kind of issues and make a contribution to the existing body of knowledge. In terms of the research objectives divided into specific and general objectives, the general objective of the study is to examine the causal effect relationship or the cause-effect relationship between macroeconomic variables, governance, and CO2 emission in commercial countries. And to operationalize this, we divide them into 3 specific objectives. Objective number 1 is to evaluate the causality between energy consumption, economic growth, governance, and CO2 emission. And objective number 2 will basically be able to determine the effect of sectoral GDP when we decompose this GDP into 3 and on emissions, so that we are able to see the specific contribution of each sector to emission, so that we have emission specific strategies. Of the study, the scope of the study is that the study will cover 21 African countries who are members of COMESA. The time scope, it will stand from 2018. This period allows us to study everything. All the variables will be in place. And probably if the estimation takes place, maybe we can expand it from 2018 to 2019, but that is subject to data availability. The number of countries, N is 21, T is the number of period, which is 23, and N are the countries, and T are the years. The countries under COMESA, they're 21, and it's specified below, and I don't need to spend time to go through those countries. The significance of this particular study is that it will introduce the role of governance in understanding CO2 emission and brings in the role of regional integration into economic, this one is out. But number 3, we will be able to decompose GDP into sectors, and we will also be able to evaluate the nexus, the relationship between these variables, and see what causes what. But also in our causality analysis, we will be able to introduce a new method, probably is the latest in studying causality. It's Mitchell-Halley in 2012, which is a little bit superior to Engel-Granger residual-based causality test. And we will be able to do slope heterogeneity and cross-sectional dependence, which in many studies they ignore, but there are serious implications of ignoring them. And the results of the studies that ignore this particular test are likely to have inconsistent parameter estimates. And we expect to introduce this so that our results are relevant. This is the framework of literature, but it echoes exactly what I talked about, different results in terms of empirical work where scholars are not agreeing, and I've shown that one in the statement of the problem. In terms of the methodology and procedures of the research, the study will take a longitudinal study design. And this is selected because of the efficiency and more variability and more information that we get when we are using this method than when we are using the time series. Time series always, for developing countries, we have a very huge problem that most of the data are not sufficient and the period are still very, very short, especially for energy studies. And you are likely to have a problem in the estimation. So that is why I prefer to use a panel study. And we also discovered that the panel data techniques minimizes the estimation bias due to aggregations of the N, the number of countries coming together into a single time series. And it also addresses the commonalities and heterogeneity issues that are always within the countries. And the longitudinal design has also been accepted in the literature to be very important in studying causal effect relationship. So that is the rationale for going through the longitudinal study. In terms of the philosophical design, I propose to do a positivism paradigm because the explanatory relationship and the causal association will use the quantitative techniques. And I do believe we will not be able to create subjective nature because these are the data which are already collected. And there is no problem in terms of bringing subjective values into this. Try as much as possible to be, a researcher will not be able to bring his views, but only to report what will be provided for by the results. And majority of this data will basically be got from the World Bank Development Indicators, which is an open data source. Is relatively a well-known data source or database for economists and other people who are interested in economic indicators to study their effect. So in terms of the theoretical framework, we start to understand emission, that where does our emission come from? Emission basically comes through a production process. And therefore, because of that, we model production process, which we from the neoclassical framework, you produce a good by employing capital and labor in the production process. Cobb-Douglas basically created the model that allows us to do the estimation by putting A, which is the technical progress. But in this particular study, we will assume the technical progress, which is A, as constant over a period of time, but K, the alpha and beta are output elasticities. But this particular model has been a challenge that is not sufficient. You don't only produce by use of capital and labor. We need to introduce energy into production function. So in this particular model, we introduce energy. And if we introduce energy into the production function, therefore we modify our Cobb-Douglas production function. And then we use this particular equation 3 and institute it. We substitute it into the CO2 emission. And that would be the specification. And equation 4, the equation 4 and equation 5 allows us to test the environmental Kuznets hypothesis. And we will also be able to use the IPAT theory, which I mentioned at the very beginning. And it has population affluence, which is basically the GDP, and then the technology. This is the panel framework and equation 7, which takes care of those. The B, C, and D are the elasticities. So in terms of model specifications, specification objective number 1, it uses the causality test. This is the framework, which is a pairwise under Dimitri-Halin 2012. It allows you to basically test the relationship. You pick one variable, for example, YIT, which basically can be our GDP. We can compare it maybe with the energy consumption, and then we will basically be able to check the relationship. In the second model, it is basically you make the one which was the independent variable to become dependent. So in other words, all of them are endogenous. They are not exogenous variables. So there is nothing like DV, all of them can play the role of DV in that particular causality test. And that will be done with a set of the hypothesis there. That is how objective number 1 will be handled. So objective number 2, it has its own specification and it will adopt this STIPAT model. And in terms of the empirical formulation, we will basically be able to look at the role of urbanization in the IPAT. The urbanization will basically be able to be a proxy for the population. Then there is a decomposition of the 3 factors, the 3 sectors of the economy. One is this AVA is agricultural value added, manufacture value added, and service value added. All of them, if we make the summation, they give us GDP. So we want to see the effect of each of them by the disaggregation. But I also introduced the idea of bringing the non-renewable energy consumption and then renewable energy consumption and see what is their effect. And then we'll be able also to introduce the idea of energy intensity and carbon intensity. All of these variables will be investigated because all of them have serious policy implications depending on the science that we get. So objection number 3, we will basically be able to test the Kuznets hypothesis. If you check, remember still in our Kuznets hypothesis in the theoretical frame, we put y squared, and y cubed. So those y's were gross domestic product, which will be measured in real forms. We need to test that, and that is the specification. And we introduced the governance. Governance is basically a vector which has these following areas: voice and accountability, governance effectiveness, rule of law, rule of law, political stability, regulatory authority, and corruption index. This will be measured in percentage index. Somebody may be worried about where do you get this data from. It's still also in World Bank governance indicators. It has all of these measures already collected, so it's just a matter of making the analysis. But I also intend to look at the effect of regional integration, whether we being in COMESA is helping us to reduce emission, because COMESA has also emission targets. So that will be looked at. Then there are towards the last, there are diagnostic tests that are supposed to be conducted in order to ensure that there is reliability and validity. Most of the empirical works, the scholars would basically be interested in checking whether there is reliability or validity of results. So the first step in cross-panel studies is to conduct a cross-sectional dependency study. And this one, we will use the LM test and cross-section dependency test. The result that comes from there will tell us where to go. Then we will be in position to look at slope heterogeneity, which uses Pessaran and Yamagata test. And the expected result is that if we find there is slope homogeneity, we will consider that we have sectoral cross-sectional independence, and that is a first generation panel. When we find the slope is heterogeneous, then basically we will be able to say there is a cross-sectional dependency, meaning that the countries have common issues in them and they are not observed, and that one falls under second generation panel. Route techniques now will be determined the type of test, what results that we have got. If we find that there is a cross-sectional independence, then we will be in position to use IPS, which is IM, Pessaran Smith, a test, or ADF. Those are series of tests that allows us to ensure that we check whether our data is stationary or not. If we find there is a cross-sectional dependency, then we will basically be able to deal with cross-sectionary augmented Dickey-Fowler or cross-sectionary IM and Pessaran Smith tests. They are also different tests and designed for studying the two. After that, we go through what we call panel co-integration to check whether there are long-run co-integration. But since we have not yet conducted the study, I also propose that we will be able to do either the first generation or second generation panel co-integration test. The first generation co-integration test is Pedrani, Cow, and Fisher, and the second generation test for panel co-integration, where the long-run relationship exists, is by the work of the Westerlund. The estimations are provided, the estimation strategy. It also depends on the result that we get. When we find there is no autocorrelation, and our studies is showing us that there is no heterogeneity, there is no indigeneity, the estimation techniques will be full ordinary least square estimation. But should we find there is heterogeneity, we will basically be able to check between the fixed effect or random effect using what we call the Osman test. When we find there is indigeneity and we are dealing with the first generation test, then we will be able to use generalized methods of moment proposed by Arellano and Bon and Arellano Bova. That is basically what is expected. Some other studies use instrumental variables or moderations by use of structural equation modeling techniques to ensure that the indigeneity bias is taken off in the estimation. For the second, for the first generation data, if we find they are not stationary, but they are stationary at first difference, that means that after finding our data not stationary, but we do difference and they are stationary, then we will be able to use fully modified ordinary least squares or dynamic ordinary least squares that can be used. And then we will be able to use vector error correction and to check for the causality. But if we have the second generation panel, and then we test and find that they are co-integrated at I1, then the estimation techniques proposed is to use mini group or pool mini group to ensure that they are to select between mini group and pool mini group. We also use Osman test to select the appropriateness. There are also other advanced techniques which are used to study these. One of them are common correlated effect mini group, augmented mini group, and then also pool mini group and autoregressive distribution lag. These are used, and all these estimation strategies will depend on the results. Lastly is basically the ethical considerations. The proposed study does not have any direct interface with humans or animals in form of an experiment. However, the ethical consideration is always important in any research in terms of report writing. Therefore, we expect I should basically ask the lead person in doing this particular research to ensure that the reports are safeguarded from plagiarism, research misconduct, and the result will be accurately reported. A good scientific communication in terms of honesty, reliability, and credibility will be respected, and the data will not be falsified, manipulated, or the results will not be misinterpreted in the report. And me who is doing the research does not have any conflict whatsoever in any form. And I do expect that everything that will be reported here will basically follow the research process and guidelines. Thank you very much, members, for listening to me. There were a number of hiccups, but thank you for bearing with me. Thank you.
Okay, Jacob, thank you so much for bearing with the challenge and being able to present. I think I want to welcome all of us to the presentation which has been made by Jacob. But before we move to that, I want to acknowledge some of the new senior colleagues who joined during the presentation. That is Dr. Coretti and then Dr. Sister Mary. We welcome you. So at this junction, I want to invite all of us to make comments, but Jacob, you unshare the screen so that we could be able to unshare your screen, please. Jacob.
Okay, I will do that.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe I want to vary a bit today. I want to begin from senior colleagues, then we go to the students. So maybe senior colleagues, we could do give our comments. Jacob has been able to highlight many issues, and I think I would welcome us to make comments. Maybe let me just open it to everyone. If you have any comment for Jacob, you can raise up your hand. Yes, you can unmute your mic. And yes, yes, Livia.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairperson, and good morning, colleagues. Jacob, thank you for this beautiful presentation. I literally enjoyed up to the last minute without dozing off. My concerns are just 2-3. They might not be really, I could be maybe needing some bit of clarification or, So from the beginning, I saw that you have a very strong problem and the gaps are in there. But my question is, or my concern is, that within the countries that you're interested in, I didn't see Uganda, and I was just wondering how big is the carbon emission issue in Uganda? And to me, I think if you could also capture this, it helps us to see how relevant your study is also to Uganda as a country. And secondly, when you go to your model number 12, I see you introduced regional integration. I didn't see it as an issue coming up. So should we assume that regional integration is a part of governance, that you introduced it in model number 12? And then also, I found the whole study more of a time series than a panel, and all the tests that you are proposing are more of a panel related. So why then not go panel? And I was also thinking about the robustness and the sensitivity tests. That are there any that you're going to use maybe to ensure that your results are robust to any other either measurements? And yeah, so those are my issues of team. Otherwise, the study was, the presentation was very good and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Can we have Ronald, then Senono, Vicente?
Thank you so much, Brother Tim, for that presentation. You really gave a good background, highlighting and informing us on the effects of global warming, climate change. But when I look at your topic, macroeconomic variables, governance, and carbon emission nexus in COMESA. In your background, you really presented the issue of agriculture, but but the question is, I'm still wondering, how were you able to link agriculture to low GDP, which is really a key point? And is low GDP the only macroeconomic variable that you have taken into consideration? And there are other macroeconomic variables which you could have used to come out, or if you have chosen GDP, if you could just explain why you went for that. The other issue which Madam Sylvia has brought out is the 21 African COMESA countries. When that data processing become too much, wouldn't it be much simpler if you focused on the East African region? And I noticed this when you presented that in the significance slide, and you discussed about regional integration. Using East Africa, wouldn't it be much easier, make your task much more simpler? Then the third area I'm just also a bit raising to find out more. Your theoretical framework, you discussed the use of the Cope-Douglas production function. I'm wondering, how do you account for elasticity, or how do you take into point elasticity, since these countries have different rates of GDP production and they vary in the way they impose these resources? I conclude, Chair. Thank you once more, really, for the work.
Okay, Vincent.
Hello. Thank you, Chair and Jacobo. I have two comments. One of the comments is on the data. I'm wondering, this is just a comment, that some of these countries have been doing rebasing of their GDP figures and using the World Bank indicators. If you have done some analysis, you can see that there's some bit of inconsistency in that data, and it doesn't reflect the rebasing which has taken place within different countries. I don't know whether that some of the things as raised by Sylvia and other colleagues, such type of data, are you going to do some bit of testing that with the existing countries' statistics, so that we are sure that yes, World Bank has been used to publish papers, but changes have happened over time. I think this is something you need to talk about. Two, you also need to consider the regional blocks in terms of economic integration. You find that some countries are in that block, but also in East African bloc. Other countries are not. So when we are looking at the country fixed effects and the regional block effect, I think it would be important to consider them in your regression. Maybe I missed it, but I think it would be important to consider the country fixed effects, the different regional blocks effects, so that we get better results. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Walugembe.
Thank you very much, Chair, for this. Mine is just small. I wanted our team just to take me back. How is he going to analyze the gen objective? Because if I'm not mistaken, the focus has been largely on the specific objectives. How is he going to handle the gen objective? Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Gideon. Jacob, I hope you are noting down most of these things. Then we come into, and I think after Gideon, then we can get into some small interaction, because some comments touch into the focus, which could be able. Dr. Gideon, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Jacob, thank you for the presentation. I see the work you have really done, and you have put in a lot of effort. I must appreciate that. I may give generic comments for noting, and then you look at them. I had some bit of challenge when you started, especially when it comes to the topic and the whole background. You have some necessary information that sometimes may cause or they may lead to more questions to come in. I think as you refocus further in subsequent presentations, my view would be to keep the eye on the topic, because I see the animal you're handling is carbon emissions, but to some extent there are some necessary information that we're emphasizing on. That's generic. The other one is, again, refers to what other people have also mentioned, the justification for your testing ground. I do not see the need why you should look at all those countries. And you're aware that they operate at different levels. So how are you going to handle, like Zenon has mentioned, you're likely to have some endogeneity issues. How are you ready to handle them? I think you may have to think about that. 3, by the time you look at this concept of carbon emissions, you need to know where you're coming from. Since you did systematic review, to me I expected to hear the schools of thought, where you are coming from, what other people think about this. Why would you bring all these predictors in your model? I think my view, you need to, maybe it may be in your main document, but I did not hear that. The other one again tends to correlate with what Dr. Ahmad has mentioned. On each objective you have a model, and I am sure you have the purpose of the study. The purpose of study gives you a general model, and this specific objective could emanate from the general model. I do not see that generic model that you have, which you want to test, that brings out those specific objectives, such that by the time you carry this study, we should have the new model that is coming out, what has changed. So I think you may need to harmonize that to guide you. I think it is important. I think the other one seems not to be a major kind of observation. Maybe I may ask you, do you have the data really so far? Do you have the data? If you have the data, it would be good for you to start working backward to see whether really what you need to achieve may make some sense, so that you don't reach somewhere and become stuck. Since you are using longitudinal and the panel data, definitely, then do you have this data on these variables? Or somewhere may reach some and become stuck. That's a food for thought, Jacob. Thank you very much. I submit.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Gideon and Dr. Ahmad. I think at this juncture, Jacob, can you make a response on the comments?
Chair, can I add?
Yes, please. Yes, it's okay, Prof.
Sorry for Jacob to say something. I just want to emphasize a few things. I know that some of the comments have been raised, but I want to emphasize one. I think when Jacob starts out to write his background, he needs to put his eyes on the topic. I see him losing the direction, and I think that's why Gideon uses the word, the animal that is hunting, or the animal that he wants to hunt, seems to be carbon emissions. But when you listen to his background, I think about 80%, if not 90% of his background ignores the animal and probably goes out for other things. So he needs to do that. And I've also noted in his topic, he has a word nexus, because it's macroeconomic variables, governance, and carbon emissions nexus in COMESA. And when he uses the word nexus, I get an impression that is looking at a series of connections. Is looking at a series of relationships. Is looking at causal links. So that causal link between a number of constructs I know that during his modeling, he talks about causation and so forth. But those tests and the modelings need to reflect the topic that he has. So I also think that his eyes are not really on the topic in the background. Now, when he goes to the research problem, the research problem brings out a few things that I think are not articulated in the background. At least the evidence of the things that he wants to study doesn't seem to appear in the background. For example, he says that the causality between GDP, energy consumption, and carbon dioxide emissions are inconclusive. Now, the background does not bring out any debate about literature that seems to be at variance, or literature that seems to contradict, therefore pushing the debate forward in the direction that, direction where he wants to go. So I think the background should largely bring out the non-coherence. So when he's constructing literature, non-coherence must feature in the background so that he can eventually tell us that his research gap is that. But there is no discussion of that. He just concludes that there is that issue. The other one, again, that's what Gideon raised. Yes, you've got models for each of the objectives, and that's okay. It's the right thing to do. But these small models for each of these objectives must be deriving some kind of motivation from a larger or a bigger model. That doesn't seem to come out. And that also reflects in the issue of generalization of your findings. Bring in the idea that Vincent, I think, raised when he talked about the country-specific effects and the regional effects, because at the end of the day, you should be able to generalize your findings too. So I think some of these things need to be articulated. Chair, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you so much. I want to invite Jacob to respond some of the comments, and then we shall take another round of comments, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koche, the moderator. There are a number of comments raised. I do appreciate. They are valuable and very, very important. Number one, just to respond, Sylvia talked about Uganda. Uganda is part of COMESA. So I think in my work, a little bit I was fast, but Uganda is there. We are going to look at Uganda. So it's part of COMESA. This study I'm doing is a panel study, it's not a time series studies, but from practice by other people, you can be looking at a panel study, but at the same time, if you want to look at individual countries without a panel, you can run their own time series. That basically is subject to the researcher, the way he is interested in giving us the highlights or what is very interesting. You can do a time series because this is a cross-sectional time series. So it has information for Uganda, but also can aggregate for the entire country. So that can be looked at, subject to agreement with the doctoral committees. If they feel it is quite good to look at all that, we will be able to consider. There are a number of robustness tests. I took almost about 10 minutes showing different tests and the direction that we can conclude. That's why I don't have specific estimation strategy unless I do those tests. It's like going to a doctor, minister any drug unless the test tells you so. So the estimation strategy cannot be determined at the proposal level unless the results coming from the data analysis show go this direction, and that is when we will be able to go there. GDP is a major focus. In my analysis here, though I'm looking at, it's a major predictor. Though I'm looking at CO2 emission, we all know that we are talking about emission because of human activities, what they call anthropogenic activities of man. So when we want to do like we are doing, or like we are in a discussion now, we'll find that we are doing some emission with the gadgets that we have. So in order to produce goods and services, definitely emission comes in. So the major macroeconomic variable is GDP, which basically is the result of human activities, and I included in my production model by indicating energy consumption, that energy is a key issue in this particular modeling because it's responsible for the amount of emission that we receive. And that's why people talk about fossil fuels. So the focus has been on fossil fuel, but there is some research work that I've sent to a journal. Now, I discovered that even with the research that have been done, we are not yet to solve this particular problem because non-renewable energy has no contribution to growth. That is what the study is showing. The major contribution to growth in a number of studies carried out is the use of fossil fuel. But there is a serious thing coming up that we should stop the use of fossil fuel, and yet is the one contributing to growth. That would bring a policy dilemma. If we stop the use of fossil fuel, basically we may stop growth. Most of our automobiles and factories are run on this fossil fuel. So that is the debate we are looking at. So the 21 countries are not many because there are panels where people do up to 6 countries. They look at a global panel. This is even a very small panel in terms of these cross-country panels. So I don't think there is a very big problem when it comes to the number of countries because statistical package, the bigger the panel, the better even for the analysis. Hope-Douglas production function provides us different elasticities. I tried to derive when you are dealing with a theoretical framework, where is it coming from? We are showing, yes, we are dealing with emission, but emissions start from growth, from production of human activity, and then we look at that, and then there are basically like 3 theories. One is a production model, which leads us into 2 controversies. The IPAT model and then Kuznets hypothesis. The Kuznets model is criticized on the use of those squared terms, that it's likely to cause heterogeneity. So it's better to check the 2 estimation strategy in order for us to give us what basically responsible for our emission. Rebasing GDP, I have not seen in any study where people have adjusted the GDP in these studies. Maybe if we are to consider it for this particular study, but that would also be an uphill task to convert and rebase all the GDP. Many scholars use the data which is provided by World Bank and is highly trusted. Of course, it has issues, but that is basically, that is the global data we are using now when it comes to this particular analysis. It's a little bit difficult to play around with World Bank data unless it's advised, so we can check that with the technical team, the advisors, if they can accept that. Mr. Senona, I accept your idea in blocking this, and there are a number of practice where people do regional blocking. So that basically you check if there is a uniqueness in a particular block. I think I had not put that one in my mind, but I think I can take that and then try to look at different blocking. Like, for example, we can look at the East Africa, then you see there are some part of the MENA countries, especially countries like Libya, Libya or Mauritius. Some of them are part of the Middle East. So we can do that blocking and we see the contribution And that means running a number of models, and then we try to look at what are uniqueness, what are those unique specific effects to these blocks and specific effect to the country. That can be done in the main analysis. I think that is a good proposal, and I will look at that. A general model, I think maybe I need to be corrected for the little training I had. I thought now when you have a general objective, you break the general objective into specific objectives so that it is manageable. And that's why I was breaking my general objective, which is causal effect. The idea is that cause comes before the effect. We need to know what causes emission, and then we also need to look at what are these effects. There are two different things. Cause is different from the effect, but the cause comes first and then the effect secondary. In the estimation, you can find there is effect, but there is no causality. Those findings are there where you study the effect of one variable on the other, you see the effect is there. But when you test for their causality, you may find one causes the other and may not cause the other one. So that is why it is important. Heterogeneity issues I highlighted, and there are specific tests for heterogeneity, and I indicated in that particular presentation. Of course, I was also receiving a feedback, and I don't know how I made my presentation. I had done some few things which I discovered was a little bit bad for me. So, but I remember talking about heterogeneity test. When you carry out heterogeneity, you basically, that is what tells you whether to use fully modified ordinary least squares or dynamic ordinary least squares. Because if there is heterogeneity in your model, you cannot go and run generalized methods of moment. That is not allowed. Even the fixed effect becomes inappropriate for that particular analysis in the event that the fixed effect can be done for heterogeneity, but you can't run the full OLS. So that is considered in the estimation. Many predictors, yes, there are in the modeling, you come out with specific variables, and there are also variables that we consider them as controls for you to avoid omitted variable bias. So there are additional variables that you had, because if you use also very few variables, you are likely to suffer omitting some key variables that probably could have informed you in policy formulation. So some people suggest that the more the variables, so long as you have so many data points, the number of variables are not a problem. But after running your model, if you find certain variables are really not having good factor loading, some of those variables can be dropped, and then you remain with the linear variable. That is what they normally do in structural equation model using those explanatory factors and confirmatory. One we don't do here, but should you find you have a number of variables which are insignificant and they are not key in your estimation, they can be dropped so that the final model that you will be reporting now takes into account those key variables. So what we propose during the proposal stage, some few things will be dropped out. The data will basically also guide whether to maintain some of them. So there is that trial in order for you to have a clean focus. My key issues is CO2. Probably I didn't explain it very much in the background, but I see it is a very, very key issue. In my write-up, I indicated so much about CO2, but I was also rushing due to technical glitch. So some of those were omitted, but I see it is a very fundamental thing, as Professor Tai has put it, to ensure that the background really communicates before you introduce the statement of the problem. Because the question that would come, where is your statement coming from if it's not emanating from the background? By the time you conclude the background, the idea is that some of the key issues and controversies, those non-coherence in the empirical work should be indicated. And I think I take that comment very positively. And in the subsequent presentation, I have to ensure that that one is taken into account. Thank you, members. This is how far I can respond to this.
Okay, Jacob, thank you so much for the responses. But I think you need critically to reflect on the following. One, on the emphasis of carbon emission in your background. Of course, all of us appreciate that global warming basically is contributed by carbon emissions. And even when you look at most of those protocols, which have signed the Kyoto, and I think for Kyoto specifically, it's only Japan which was able to meet it at some point. But so I think just focus on the most of the comments raised. Actually, carbon emission is the critical issue. The other thing also, which I think is very critical, of course, I'm recollecting from what you are responding and also what was raised by Professor and all the other members. Now, when you look at your problem statement actually highlights that most of the studies are more specific. Now, for you, you are coming to fill the gap by coming up with a holistic model. That's why the comment by Dr. Gideon, Dr. Ahmad, and Professor are very critical, because it's not the specific models which are a critical issue here. The critical issue is a holistic model which brings in all those variables which different people are looked at specifically. So I think your major contribution should be to fill that problem. So I would think that you need to consider that. The other issue also, which I think is very critical, rising from, and I think you consider the issue of regional blocks, because actually that could be a major factor, because the different regional blocks have different arrangements on which they manage some of the issues. So that could be a contributing factor. So it would be good for you to look at that. But I see Bernard has a comment. But maybe before Bernard comes in, I saw like the choice of the paradigm was based on the choice of method. And yet I thought it's the other way around. The philosophy is normally which guides you on the methodology, because within philosophy, there are different philosophical assumptions or beliefs, and which methodology is one of them. So from your presentation, is like you chose the method and then later on selected the philosophy. I think it should be the other way around. Though the justification is okay, but really that needs to be people oriented. Bernard, please, you make your comments.
Thank you very much, Chair, Dr. Okoche. I want to thank Jacob and in a way congratulate you for the steps you've taken so far to get to this place. And Jacob, they are just thoughts which I just want to put to you as you continue walking through. Now, the topic, particularly macroeconomic variables, seems to raise a lot of expectations before we go on that particular issue. The macroeconomic variables may raise a lot of expectations, but listening and walking through your presentation, that particular item collapsed in a way to GDP. I don't know, for consideration, if we would rather people would drop the macroeconomic variables and replace it with growth or economic growth, to be specific, so that issues of exchange rates or interest rates or any other dimension that comes through the macroeconomic space may not come to you going forward as a question. It's just a thought. Two, when you specified the Kuznets curve in the equation, you showed the polynomial, the highest power I saw was 3, but I thought that curve, even from the diagram you showed, is a quadratic, or unless there is a justification for raising it to 3, which we can usually, of course, always justify, so that we don't raise questions of why not power 4, because by going to a polynomial, anything is even possible, can even go to power 6. But just for theoretically, so that we are not, or you are not asked beyond the things when you state them, because people expect those shares or elasticities to have some background. 3, I observed governance is one of your contributions or major positions you are bringing in this whole space of studies that I've done, as you mentioned. And I saw it has sub-indicators or whatever you want to call them to construct it as governance. Now, are you going to run each of those sub-indicators alone, or you are going to have a representation or an index, some sort of index that will represent governance as a variable on its own? Then that would, of course, has to be specified. I know you defined them, but in the estimation was not particular which one, how you are going to represent or run governance in the specification. And number 4 is the issue of the panel, the first generation or second generation or whatever, and finally which one you are going to do. Of course, yes, the choice will depend on the tests from the data that you'll have. But before the data, the definitions of first generation panel, the assumption is that the units or the individuals, in this case your countries, are independent. That Uganda and, for instance, Zambia are independent units. The second generation makes that strong assumption that Uganda and Zambia are actually dependent. Now, theoretically, before we even run the data, I would imagine there is almost an intersection because of the dependency definition and which scholars are raising. Maybe because scholars are actually pushing for what they are calling the third generation, which allows for the dynamic interactions of dependence versus independence. Would you maybe consider looking at that, or even so that you avoid, well, the data can of course tell us, but maybe use that as a unique contribution in this case going forward for the third generation panel framework that you may adopt. Finally, Chair, from me, I saw a comment, I think in the chat from Joseph, whether unit root tests are necessary for panel data. Just if I may share the little experience for especially our students who are here. Now, the assumptions of unit roots emerged from longitudinal definitions that your series or your variables have a time varying characteristics that need to be catered for. And certainly panel data also has time series characteristics, which almost requires or is mandatory that actually unit tests are performed. Yes, studies have gone on to ask whether it is necessary or not, based on two things. If you right away make strong assumptions that there is homogeneity in individuals across time, then there is no need. But if we also start from a strong position or assumption that there is heterogeneity, which panel data models try to always solve for, then it may look out. But it wouldn't kill anyone or any study that tests for it, whether finally makes sense or not, because the assumption are the ones that are best, that bring the discussion of whether it's necessary or not. Chair, those are things that I can only put across for now. Thank you again, Jacob.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bernard. I don't know if there are any other comments or maybe rejoined us, especially from maybe Professor and the senior colleagues. Because
moderator, if I can respond to some few issues, then the conclusion can be made.
Okay, fine.
Thank you, Bernard, for these comments you have raised. Number one, on dropping the use of word macroeconomic variables, we had a discussion with the supervisors. Of course, I personally had not put it, but I am under guidance. They advised me to include that so that we capture the issue of GDP and energy consumption. And that's why I put that into that particular, that caption. Then raising your issue of environmental Kuznets curve, in the analysis, the polynomial are used up to degree 3. The reason why they do, the first year estimation for the Y1 is expected to be greater than 0, meaning that is positive, that is the rising point. Then the downward point, you expect the beta for Y2 to basically Y to power 2 to be now falling. But now, if you are to maintain that particular thing, the 3rd-degree polynomial is basically supposed to test. If definitely it maintains the U shape, then you would expect that coefficient to be equal to 0. So if you don't find that coefficient equal to 0 or is now positive, it means you are having n hypothesis. So meaning that your emission is going to rise, reach a maximum fall, and start rising up again. So when you find your beta 3, picking one of the indexes, I think it is okay. The use of panel data 1 and 2, yes, your observation is correct. The countries, yes, you can assume they are independent, but also you assumed, yes, their interdependency. Test basically provides that. It is difficult to know unless you have the data speaking, and that's why it is important to test. I can't promise I can go to a 3rd generation. This needs when I have more time because I'm not sure of it. And I've not seen any other person doing that modeling. And I can't now, given the time span, I can't be the first to start that. That needs more time to do those dynamics between generation 1 and generation 2.